one of the greatest empires in world history was the Mali Empire. The Mali Empire was one of the most prosperous and powerful empires in the antiquity of Africa. Its growth and expansion from the 13th century onwards was legendary and pivotal in the history and culture of Western Africa. The Mali Empire Volume 1 from author J.P. Martin, available on Amazon, is a book which provides the full historical record of the Mali Empire. From their control over the trans-Saharan trade routes and development of great cities such as Timbuktu, to their influential royal class who produced notable African kings such as Mansa Musa, Sundiata Keita, and Mansa Abubakar Keita II, the Mali Empire made a significant impression. This book is perfect for anyone interested in learning more about the history of Western Africa. Order your copy right now on Amazon. The Mali Empire, Volume 1, from author J.P. Martin. Go to Amazon.com and get your copy today.
Alexis here, coming to you with an awesome sale of 25% off when you use promo code OHURU25 at alexisfowler.com. I provide services like digital art, logo designs, packaging designs, web designs, social media flyers, and much more. If you're an entrepreneur with a business or a startup company, make sure you take advantage of this opportunity, getting 25% off when you use promo code OHURU25 at alexisfowler.com.
At the Okoli Law Group, we specialize in producing justice. If you or a loved one in the Atlanta metro area is facing serious criminal charges, then you need serious legal representation.
The Okoli Law Group is here for you. The Okoli Law Group is here for us.
The Okoli Law Group, serious legal representation.
Peace, family. I hope all is well. I hope your Thursday, your Friday Eve is going well. Do me a favor, do me a solid, hit that like button. That is your price of admission to the In Search of Uhuru podcast. Again, please hit the like button. Also, make sure you share and make sure you subscribe. Before we get started, we have a couple of announcements. I am looking forward to going to Nigeria on Sunday. We leave Sunday for Nigeria for the Osun Festival, and I am looking forward to it. We're going to have an excellent time. We're going to have a great time in Nigeria for the Osun Festival. Oh, man, it's going to be, I cannot wait. I'm looking so forward to it. Our yearly pilgrimage to Nigeria for the Osun Festival. Also, Zanzibar, November 12th through the 21st, November 12th through the 21st. If you are interested in joining us in Zanzibar, please visit Danfo, DANFO.Africa. Please visit Danfo, DANFO.Africa to learn more. Click travel, then click Zanzibar. And then there's Benin in January for the Voodoo Festival, January 3rd to 12th. Benin in January for the Voodoo Festival. So we are going to Nigeria on Sunday. Then we head to Zanzibar in November. And then we head to Benin in January. Please visit Danfo, DANFO.Africa. And then hopefully they should be announcing any day now. Sierra Leone for the citizenship ceremony. That should be coming any day now, you guys. So if you're eligible for citizenship or if you just want to roll to Sierra Leone, hit me up, go to Danfo.Africa and send me a message. Without further ado, we got brother Ebube Okoli on, our resident lawyer. Brother Ebube, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Dynasty man, first off, what's going on, brother?
Man, all is well. Can't complain. I'm headed to Nigeria on Sunday.
Oh, so you got to be feeling right now. You got to be. Oh, you're gonna have a good time. Oh my goodness, you're gonna have
excellent time. Excellent time.
Keep your head on a swivel, and do everything you need to do, and enjoy everything, and bring us back plenty of footage, man.
Of course, it's coming. It's coming, of course.
Yeah. But for those that don't know me, my name is Ebube Okoli. I'm a Nigerian-born, American-trained attorney and geopolitical analyst. I'm the creative director of a channel here called Up Close and Center, where we drop impactful and meaningful documentaries. If you haven't gone to Up Close and Center, make sure you go and subscribe. Now, I've been saying I have about 4 documentaries that are done that I'm going to drop in very close succession to each other, so that you're really going to enjoy those when they drop. So, and also to the content that's already there, go ahead and check that out. You're bound to love it. You're going to love every second of it. And the replay value is there. But I'm going to be going on a run here shortly. I just have to really focus on what I'm doing because, of course, I'm a very busy man. But we thank God for everything that He's given us, and we keep moving forward. So I'm also the lead attorney and head partner at the Okoli Law Group here based in Atlanta and the surrounding areas. We do serious criminal defense, premium criminal defense. So you shouldn't get in any trouble, but if you do, make sure you call the Okoli Law Group. You can Google us. You can find us anywhere. You can also go on Instagram and find the Okoli Law Group. But yeah, Dynas, we're here, man. And we're here. Thank goodness. Everything is going good in life.
Yeah. So today's topic is Russia replacing Francophone Africa, African influence.
Well, that's an interesting question because, as much as people want to degrade Africa and talk down on Africa, Africa has everything going for it. It's just there are external complications that are imported to the interior of Africa from the exterior. But Africa largely has no real internal problems outside of the external problems. But whenever you're ready,
man, we're ready. We're ready. Let's rock and roll. Let's jump right into it.
And click on that for you. Let me do that. Just give me 1 second. But yeah, things are getting interesting, and I look at it like this is most likely just the beginning of what we're gonna be seeing. This is most likely.
Yeah, if you're sharing a presentation, I don't see it yet where I can actually share it as well. So,
okay, just 1 second.
Or just however you're gonna do it.
Yeah,
but it's interesting. But let me ask a question. So,
sure.
You already had the coup in Guinea-Conakry. You had the coup in Mali, Burkina Faso. Now Niger. But it seems as if there's a sense of urgency when it comes to Nigeria as far as trying to, remove the what's the term? Junta, correct?
Well, some people pronounce it junta.
Junta, yeah. Remove the junta and replace the government that was in power. Like, I never seen this sense of urgency. Like, why is that? We didn't hear this in Mali. We didn't hear it in Burkina Faso. We didn't hear it in Guinea-Conakry. It was kind of just like, business as usual. But for some reason with Niger, people are like, oh, man, we got to get rid of the junta, and we have to get the president who his name slips my mind at the moment, get him back in power. To the point where
you have to understand.
Sorry, Ebube, to cut you off. To the point that ECOWAS is threatening military intervention.
Yeah, you got to understand
the border. So that's going to be interesting.
And you got to understand that everything is connected, right? So there's an economic level and a political level to everything. So let's say that my country has been bound in certain agreements to do certain things. And then all of a sudden, a new political force comes along and says, well, we're no longer going to do those obligations because they don't favor my nation. So we're no longer going to do those things. Well, then someone might just say, you know what? I don't like this government. I think we should get rid of this government because this government, they weren't democratically elected or any other means to delegitimize that particular government. So that's the thing about this particular situation.
Okay. But yeah, let's jump into it. So what happened? Like, what happened?
All right, whenever you're ready to get into it, I don't know.
We're ready to roll, but for some reason, if you have a presentation, it's not showing. But if you don't want to share it, that's fine. But let's jump into it.
Okay, well let me pull it back up. Hopefully it's going to show up right now. Let me know.
Yeah, it's coming. It's here. Man.
Perfect. All right.
There. Okay.
Yes, sir. All right. So now we're going to dive right into it. We're going to go ahead and get into West Africa. That's where all the attention seems to be heading to right now is West Africa. So that's what we're going to focus on right now. We're going to focus on what's going on in West Africa. All right. Now you have to remember that West Africa is the setting of a lot of ancient empires. And of course, a lot of wealth as well. A lot of wealth is held in West Africa, particularly. And West Africa was always a pretty organized place. Historically, there were a lot of really grand, great, sophisticated empires that existed in this region. So there's always been high expectations because this was always an area in Africa of high culture, high civilization, and some of the world's firsts. So this area was never an area that was historically behind other regions in the world up until very recently. And we'll look into why that is. All right, now West Africa today is organized they're independent nations. However, the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, is a body that has, in a sense, united all of West Africa. So, for example, with an ECOWAS passport, you don't need a visa into Benin, Burkina Faso, Cape Verde, Cote d'Ivoire, the Gambia, Ghana, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mali, Nigeria, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Togo. So if you have an ECOWAS passport, which you can get from your regional, if I wanted to, my ECOWAS passport comes from Abuja. So I have an ECOWAS passport as well as an American passport. So if I travel around West Africa, I can either travel around as a West African with access to all West African countries, or I can travel around as an American. Now, this is important because ECOWAS has political, military, and economic ties. So anything that happens in West Africa affects ECOWAS. Now, there have been some recent coups, and we talked about this earlier. You had Mali, you had Niger, you had Burkina Faso, you had Guinea. And each of these comes with its own unintended consequences. And a lot of these coups have their own independent reasonings, but they also have common grounds as to which and why they happened. All right, in regards to Burkina Faso, the current head of state, he's really made his mark or his position as a no joke, no nonsense type of leader. Essentially, and for those who don't know, France colonized large parts of Africa. And what colonization is, most African nations weren't colonized for that long. Some groups were only colonized for 20 years, 25 years. So theoretically, let's say a group was colonized in the year 2000. In 2 years, colonization would be over for some people. That's how long it lasted. Others, it lasted a little bit longer. But the average time was maybe 40 years nations were colonized, which isn't that bad in the grand scheme of things, but it's what happened during those 40 years. During those 40 years, agreements were made. So certain agreements were made with certain foreign nations that basically said, we have the ability to buy your natural resources at 10% their value and then turn around and sell them for 100% their value. Now, of course, that's a terrible deal for whoever signs it. But when you're colonized, your leaders aren't really leading the nation in your interest. They're leading in the interest of the person who's come to colonize you. So even though 40 years of colonization wasn't a long time, some of the agreements that were foisted onto these later to become independent nations were very lopsided, to say the least. Moreover, some of these coups have happened because now we have to understand when it comes to independence, there's 2 levels of independence. There is political independence and then economic independence. With political independence, what that means is that you can choose your leader, no problem. Economic independence means that, well, if you don't want to have a deal with a nation, you can stop that deal if it doesn't favor your nation. So now and you want to think about it like this, economic independence is like this. Let's say someone goes to the NBA and somehow they sign a deal where 90% of whatever they make in the NBA goes to this third party. And so this person is playing basketball and is a consistent all-star, but 90% of his money goes to this third person. Now that person may have, that athlete may have political independence, meaning that if he wants to play for the Bulls, the Lakers, the whoever, whatever team he wants to play for, he can play for. But economically, it's always going to be the same situation. He's going to be getting robbed regardless of where he plays, even though he has the freedom to leave any team he wants, which is sort of like political independence. You can choose your leader, but economic independence means that you can make decisions when it comes to your money. And many of the French West African nations weren't granted economic independence. So what we're seeing, and coups of this nature of leaders coming out against France isn't anything new. And you have to remember that many of these leaders that come out, they do it in a militaristic way because they understand that, hey, if we were forced into these agreements, it's force that's going to get us out of these agreements. And they've basically come to that conclusion. So you have some of these coup leaders, and we're watching them closely to truly understand where this is going to go. But some of them have come out with anti-colonial, anti-neocolonial, anti-French rhetoric. And it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out, because West Africa is one of the regions on this planet where you've consistently had people fighting European domination. Almost for the last few hundred years, you've had battles in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, all the way up until what we're seeing today. So this is nothing new. It's just a continuation of an armed struggle against colonial powers that has been on ground since the colonial powers showed up. You also have anti-Western forces in Mali. So it's a certain bloc, and you have to understand that these are some of the richest countries in the world and some of the most important countries in the world. You may not think about the importance of a place like Niger, for example, but as we progress, you'll understand why Niger is pivotal to the world as we know it. So now, like I stated earlier, you have a block of these nations that are uniting, saying, listen, we're tired of these bad economic deals that we were signed into during colonialism, and we're willing to fight anybody who's going to force us to continue getting only 10% of the value of what we have in our country. And then that is basically taken and sold at full price elsewhere. It's an exploitative type of situation. So from that perspective, you understand why a lot of these people have populist support, which is really important for any type of military coup to survive. It has to be, you have to have wide support of the people, but then you also have to be able to defend yourself from the external actor that you sought out to defend yourself from. So it's a double-edged sword. You have to defend yourself internally from your own people, and you also have to defend yourself externally from any foreign power who may say, you know what, I'm used to getting your natural resources at 10% of the cost. Now you want to get 100%, and we're not going to be able to do that. That's not going to work for us. So now we have also the leader of Guinea, and it's interesting to see where he stands because his coup was initially, there wasn't this level of frenzy over that coup. As you noted earlier, Dinas, you stated why this particular coup in Niger.
Right.
Now, getting into the coup in Niger, like you said, we see that U.S. Secretary Blinken is calling for the immediate release of the Niger Republic, and he's still addressing him as the president. That's key, because for the United States to say, wait a minute, there's been coups all over the place, this one is very important. You have to ask yourself, okay, why this one as opposed to some of the other ones? Now and another thing to note is Africa is basically a bunch of young people. Most people in Africa are under the age of 35. The vast majority.
Youngest population on the planet.
Exactly. So most of the world's youth are Africans. So if there was only people 35 and below, the vast majority of the world's population would be African. So now you look at the Assimi Goïta in Mali. He's 40 years old. He just turned 40 very recently. Very young person. In Guinea, 42. Burkina Faso, 34 years old, running a nation. So anybody that's 34 and up, you understand what that means to be the head of your nation, and you took it by force. So don't let anybody tell you can't do anything you put your mind to, right? So also in Niger, that's the oldest, rounding at 61. All right, so as we spoke earlier, the Secretary of State of the United States, and people may say, well, what's the United States business? Now, we have to remember that the United States is on top. They're the top nation, period. If the United States says it, it happens because America has a system that everybody has bought into. Now, there are people on the periphery fighting America's system, but America still is the top dog in the yard. And they have allies. France is one of America's top allies. France has been an ally for a very long time for America. Now, America and France had problems when they were first colonizing the Americas. America and France had a lot of friction. But the good thing about these European nations and European descendants is that they can put a lot of that stuff behind them and say, yeah, well, you guys, we had problems in the past, but we need to unite because power is at stake. And really, that's how power works. You move with what's in your best interest, even if you have to now turn an enemy into an ally, or an ally into an enemy. Now, so the Secretary of State has basically reiterated that I spoke to the Nigerian president. So you see how he keeps referring to him as the Nigerian president. He's also stating that he wants ECOWAS, heads of state, and you have to remember that the Nigerian president is the head of ECOWAS. So he's essentially saying that we want regional support because France is our ally. And even though, listen, France really benefits from the agreements that they had signed during colonialism. They really need those. That's the reality. And if they don't have those, they'll be a very weak nation if they can't continue to get from Africa what they've been getting. Unfortunately, what they're doing, and we'll see that later, they've been alleged of impoverishing Africa with these deals. And if you think about it, if someone's taking 90% of your annual income every year, I mean, and let's say you have a family to feed, even if you're the most talented surgeon or engineer or attorney, if you have somebody taking 90% of what you create, what you produce, you're going to be in a very precarious situation because you're not going to have enough money to develop as a nation. So what's going to happen is that your leadership class is going to say, listen, let's take political independence to escape from poverty, to enrich ourselves, because we can't get 100%. So we're only getting 10%. Well, then 10% of the population is going to be well off feeding fat off of what we get from the government, and we'll ignore the fact that everybody else is poor. We'll ignore the fact that there's only roads in the areas where the rich people live, and everywhere else the roads are full of potholes. We'll ignore that because it is what it is.
Guys, do me a favor. Please hit the like button. As Ebube always says, that is the price of admission. Price for admission. So please hit the like button. Also share, and don't be shy. Hit the super chat button and the Cash App. All right, go ahead.
So hit that Cash App, hit that super chat, and go ahead. As Dinah said, that's your ticket for admission. Go ahead and hit the like button. You know, these independent media is very important because a lot of other places have a certain narrative that they want to give you, as opposed to just giving you the raw information and respecting your intelligence enough for you to come up with your own opinion, as opposed to potentially weaving in facts with propaganda. Now, of course, we know that the United States has come out very strongly to condemn the coup in Niger. And we have to ask ourselves, what are some of the reasons? Some of the reasons we might see are the fact that America has a drone base in Niger. They have a strong military presence. And according to the UN, Africa holds 65% of the world's total arable land, 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 8% of the world's known gas supply, 12% of the world's oil reserves, almost half of the world's gold. Africa has the largest reserves of diamond, cobalt, platinum, uranium. And you got 1.5 billion people, and most of those people, the median age, the middle age is 19. So Africa is the most important continent on the planet. There's no getting around it. So some people might say these are asshole nations, but at the end of the day, they're pretty valuable based on what everybody's looking to expend to maintain their sphere of influence in this continent. So the three major exports of Niger are gold, which it makes about 3 billion off of, oily seeds, 300 million, radioactive chemicals, 300 million, refined petroleum, about 200 million, and others. Now, if you look at that, that's a very low number. Now, if you understand what Niger actually does for some of these nations in Europe, you'll understand that these numbers are incredibly small. These are very small numbers. These are very insignificant numbers until you realize that, one, this is about only 10% or less of what these products actually resell for. So you want to look at the numbers sometimes because the numbers don't lie. Now, here's why Niger is so important. Niger is important because of uranium. Now, Niger is, I think, top 4 in uranium. Now, if you don't know what uranium is, when you go to Africa, the lights go off sometimes, right? Because one, we don't have reliable power like nuclear power. Uranium is essentially what is necessary for nuclear power plants. And many of the Western nations have nuclear power plants. That's why the lights hardly go off. There's stable light in Western nations. Reason being, uranium from many places in Africa is being taken out and used to generate power in Europe. So without Niger supplies about 30 to 40% of France's power, which is very interesting. So here's just the map of the uranium field. So you see it's partially split slightly into Algeria. And this is an important nation because Algeria appears, there's been reports that it appears to be siding with Niger. So Niger, of course, is one of the biggest uranium producers. And the fact that the coup has basically said, the coup leaders have basically said, yeah, we're not going to give you any more uranium with a 90% discount. It's now creating a situation where there may now be a potential scarcity in the EU based on their dependency of Niger. Now, if Niger is such a poor nation, but it's keeping on the lights for many nations in the EU, you have to ask yourself, how is this happening, right? And once again, you have to understand colonialism for what it is. It's a bunch of bad deals. It's almost like, if you remember TLC, the music group, when they were very big, they were selling multi-platinum records, but between all of them, I think they had like something as minuscule as like $100,000 that they were splitting, and they were making other people millions and tens of millions, but somehow they only had 100,000. It doesn't mean that they weren't talented. It doesn't mean they weren't making brilliant music. It means somewhere along the line, if you've made other people over 100 million and you only have 100,000, well, then we have to look at the agreement as to the splits. So you want to think about colonization as a very bad contract, especially in the Francophone sense, because unfortunately the economies of the Francophone nations have been hobbled to the point where many of them are only seeing 10 to 15% of what they should be seeing. So then when you look at these nations, you're like, well, how come these nations aren't competitive globally? Well, it's like, well, until they figure out a more fair sharing formula, or, you know, sort out what they need to sort out, the status quo is going to remain. Now, here's a graph of how much nuclear energy in the 2020s France is consuming. And you can just see in the nuclear energy is the orange portion. So you can see that the nuclear energy is in the growth pattern. If you look in the 1960s, it was small, and then it took a real prominent place in the 90s. And since the 90s, it's remained consistent and even slightly grown. So now, if you take away the source of nuclear power, you see the gap that creates. In the alternative, if they say, well, instead of selling this to you for 10 cents, we're going to sell it to you at market rate, which is 90 cents. Now, that means that you're going to have to account for that markup, and your economy that may rely on cheap, steady electricity is now going to have to pay a lot more, which could have serious deleterious effects on your economy. So what you're going to do is you're going to say, that sounds good, but no, if you're the person receiving the benefit, you're going to fight to maintain the benefit. That's how power works. If I've somehow managed to obtain a benefit, whether through inheritance or hard work or being born into it, or it was somehow I lucked into it, any animal that has a bone is going to fight to maintain their dominance over that bone, regardless of how they obtained it, even if they had to take it by force. So, and what we see in Niger isn't just isolated to Niger. The mineral wealth per country in Africa is ridiculous. There's a lot of nations that contain vast mineral wealth. Every nation in Africa is rich. Africa is the richest nation on the face of the earth, if we're just going to state it plainly. However, right, you have to understand that when you sign a bunch of bad deals, you can be very talented people. That's why you see some Africans come over here and you're like, wow, how did these Africans come up? But then you look at where they're at and things are so bad. It's because you might find someone who could have been a brain surgeon in Niger. Maybe they end up selling coconuts by the side of the road because the economy hasn't developed and become robust enough to account for this person's genius. So this person who could have been doing brain surgery on Nigerians in Niger is selling coconuts, or maybe selling suya, or, you know, pineapples, something very remedial. No offense to those who sell pineapples or the like, but you have brilliant minds wasting away at these type of positions all over Africa. I've met some of the most intelligent people I ever met, and they were gate men, which is essentially the security guard of a rich man's house. And you'll sit down with this person. They may know 7 languages. And you're like, this guy is amazing, right? You're like, why are you working here? And then you understand that the economy didn't afford him any opportunities because there's a system that's consistently robbing and impoverishing this nation. And the people who go into leadership are saying, listen, if we're only going to get 10%, Let's just be the 10% that are living it up. Now, we'll build a few roads and whatever we can, but at the end of the day, we're not worried about that. We're worried about us. So then someone might say, well, why is this country in such a bad shape? Well, to an extent, it is reflective on the people, because those people have allowed a system that overexploits them to stay there in that nation, when they should have said, at the end of the day, you guys got to leave because we respect ourselves too much to be cheated. So at the end of the day, there's personal responsibility of those nations. I'm not absolving them of their responsibility to live the type of lives they feel that they're deserving of. Now, in regards to all that wealth, we also have to look, and some people always ask, what's the United States business? Africa is so far away. We don't even think about Africa. But if you look at the number of military training centers, advising and tactical deployments, security operations, National Guard partnerships, U.S. bases, U.S. military and training facilities, you'll realize that the United States is in Africa more than a lot of other places. And this was really expanded during the regime of Barack Obama. So America has a vested interest in what happens in Africa and maintaining and making sure that America stays strong, because America is at the number one apex position. And anytime you're in the number one apex position, you have to make sure that everything freezes in place, meaning that we got to the top. We don't want to rock the boat. Now, if you're rocking the boat, you're affecting my interest. No, we're going to maintain the status quo. Unfortunately, if the status quo is being maintained and you're at the losing end of the status quo, it makes things difficult, because now you have to fight to change things, because you have someone actively fighting to maintain the status quo, which doesn't favor you. However, if the status quo favors you, you'll join in to say, well, we need to maintain the status quo because this favors me. My father always talks about a sandwich, and he says the difference between the bottom piece of bread and the top piece of bread is merely position, because the top piece of bread could also function as the bottom piece of bread. There's fungibility there. So the top piece of bread will always favor a system where it's the top piece of bread, especially if there's benefits that come along with being the top piece of bread. The bottom piece of bread will say, well, I'm the same thing as the top piece of bread. I just have to be on the bottom. But if I fight this system, maybe I can be on top. And of course, the top bun is going to say, I don't want you to fight the system because I don't want to be on the bottom. I want to stay on top. So now if you want to do that, of course, you're going to engage in activities like making sure your military presence is felt all over the world. And now currently we have about 6 different African countries currently under military rule. And surprise, surprise, it's a contiguous belt across the Sahel, which is one of the richest regions on the face of the earth. And somehow there have been revolutions where the governments have been overthrown, and we're yet to see what comes out of it. Because we've had a lot of situations in Africa where there are militaries that take over, but then from there, that country never fully becomes what it's supposed to become. It actually regresses. So far, they're still classifying the coup in Mali as an attempted coup, because they have been technically given, I believe, a week to vacate and restore the previous, or depending on how you view it, current president. And so it's going to be interesting, because at the end of the day, France has stated that any threat to French interest will lead to war. Now, what exactly is a French interest? And the United States has essentially echoed the same. So the actions in Niger have clearly upset France as well as the United States, who, of course, once again, people may say, why is the United States involved? They're so far away. Well, you have to remember that the United States is historical allies with France and England, and later on Germany and Italy and the rest of NATO. But the World War I allies, World War II allies are typically the strongest allies, if you will, because they've had working war systems together. So now you have the military junta, if you will, in Niger, and they've upset both France and the United States. And remember, the United States has a drone base in in Niger, and France has troops already on ground in many of the surrounding nations. Now you have to remember, whenever African leaders, and remember, colonialism is just a bunch of bad business deals, right? And those agreements were signed at a time when the presidents of these nations were really handpicked by France because they were going to, acquiesce. Now, once a nation acquiesces to these deals and gives up their economic independence, and then you tell them, go ahead and elect a leader, doesn't matter who you pick, because at the end of the day, if it's like the same thing with the NBA player, it doesn't matter what team you go to, if you're subject to a 90% reduction in salary, it doesn't matter who you pick. So it doesn't matter which president you pick, they're handicapped because at the end of the day, they're not going to have enough money to build a nation. So the nation's going to lack basic infrastructure. It's not going to be a nation that's going to be able to industrialize. It'll merely be a place where cheap resources are extracted. And so when you have leaders that say, wait a minute, I want to renegotiate for my economic independence, now you're talking about people's money. You're talking about people's economies. And they're saying, no, we want to maintain the status quo because at the end of the day, our economies rely on these agreements. And if you got a problem with it, you should have been stronger and you should have prevented the original exploitation. But now that things are set the way they are, you can't rock the boat. And people that rock the boat, things have happened to them. Now, of course, the United States is on top. They're the top player in the world. And the only position to go from the top is down. So you can only go down from the top. So, of course, when you're at the top, you're going to have to do things to maintain your position as the number one dog in the region. And so we see America is here and we see France is here, but more importantly, America is here on the side of the French. And America doesn't play. When you mess with America, the worst thing to hear when you're a head of state is that you're in contradiction of American foreign interests. Because at the end of the day, America will pull up to your doorstep. And understandably so, that's how power moves. Now, at a local level, we talked about ECOWAS earlier. Now, ECOWAS is actually really in danger right now because many of the nation states have been suspended due to the military coups, and the remaining members are being asked to attack, to militarily assist France and America.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's just ridiculous.
Well, I mean, we saw what happened to Gaddafi.
Right. So my question is, where was ECOWAS to defend Gaddafi?
Well, Gaddafi is North Africa. That's a Maghreb state. So you got to ask, where was the Arab League?
True.
Where was the Maghreb state? It may be the AU, and Gaddafi had a lot of enemies. He just had a lot of enemies. So it is what it is. And if you don't have a strong military, you got to watch what you say and do.
Right.
End of the day. It's a game of power, not a game of how you feel or a game of emotions. It's a game of power. If you have power, you can do as you please. So we're seeing the situation in ECOWAS and what it's going to become. Is there going to be a intra-regional melee, if you will?
Ebube, was Libya a member of the African Union?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, because see, somebody brought up in the chat room, ECOWAS. No, hold on, where is it? Libya isn't an ECOWAS member. Yeah, I know that, but even the African Union is talking about intervening with the in Niger as well.
Yeah.
So why didn't the African Union intervene with Gaddafi? That's my question.
Well, the African Union didn't organize to do that. There was no formal organization or organized attempt to say an attack on Libya is an attack on all of Africa. Yeah, I didn't see anything like that.
True.
That's how other nations, other continents act. That's the whole point of NATO. They say any attack on one is an attack on all, but we don't really see that in Africa, at least not yet, but we don't have anything like that in Africa. All right. So, however, we do have Guinea, the president of Guinea, recently coming out, or the head of state, military head of state, I'll call him, coming out stating that an attack on Niger is essentially a declaration of war on Guinea and that they will militarily get involved. Now, after France suspended aid to Niger, Niger suspended the export of gold and uranium. And remember, the gold and uranium, they were getting at a 90%, almost a 90% discount. So now we have to remember that it's not just the United States and France that are foreign actors in Africa. America does have 11 foreign military bases, 13 countries with a known presence in Africa. In the Horn of Africa, Northern Africa, Western Africa, there are 34 U.S. outposts. So we have America, Turkey, Italy, Belgium, China, Japan, the UAE, France, Russia, the UK, Germany, Saudi Arabia, the United States, and India. So Africa, you got to realize if Africa is the place to be, and the rest of the world knows it. Now, we have to understand that, once again, colonialism was basically, it wasn't a long duration of time, but it had a large impact because a lot of deals were signed, and a lot of these deals were anti the nations that signed them. And these nations, even after being given independence, were expected to adhere to these colonial contracts. That's called economic independence. Now, many of these nations weren't granted their economic independence, and people who have traditionally stated that they're going to fight for their economic independence, aka nationalize certain resources, meaning that we as a government are going to have full control over this. We're no longer going to adhere to the economic contracts that only give us 10% of what these things are worth, because we have a nation to build. Typically, a lot of them have been taken out. So France, of course, they know that, and President Chirac stated, and he was former president of France, that without Africa, France will slide down into the rank of a third world nation. So now, if you think about it, if France understands that without the agreements that we have with these African nations that heavily favor us, we're essentially going to be a third world nation. So now, when people look at Africa and say, well, look at these countries, look at how bad you guys are doing. Nobody ever asks, like, wait a minute, if you guys have almost half the world's wealth, shouldn't that be a place where everything's perfect? Shouldn't everywhere look like Dubai and better? Instead, people might say, well, they'll use that to castigate Africa. Rather than saying, why is it like this? They'll say, well, it's like that, therefore. And that's an interesting conclusion to come to. It shows that there's a lack of understanding of geopolitics and how the world goes. But at the same time, if an African nation is going to allow itself to be exploited, nature is going to allow you to be exploited. That's just how nature is. If you allow yourself to be exploited, animals, nature, even human beings will exploit you. Now, the Italian Deputy Prime Minister, Luigi Mao, he stated that France's exploitation of Africa is fueling migration. What his accusation essentially was, he's saying that France is so overexploiting these African nations and crippling these nations to the point where they don't even have enough money to build a nation, has basically led to the people saying, you know what, we are just going to leave and go to Europe. Because if our nations are being strangled of resources, our natural resources, to this extent, and every time someone comes along and says, well, we're going to stop these agreements, bad things happen to them, well, they say, you know what, well, we're just going to go to the places that are benefiting from our resources. So the people are following the resources. So someone in Niger who wants steady electricity has to go to Europe to get it, but the resource that's giving steady electricity to the European nation that he's probably in probably came from his village. It's an interesting dynamic when you understand that. Also, too, some have questioned the CFA, the French monetary system. And it's the basis of this system that leads to a lot of French military interventions in Africa. And to Russia. So now Russia has recently come in, and Africans have to remember that there's no true friends in the game of geopolitics. Nobody's your friend.
Right.
It's just interests. Now, Russia, of course, is anti-Western, historically since the days of the Soviet Union, and even before then. Russia has always viewed itself as apart, as in a separate entity than the rest of Europe, than Western Europe specifically. Now, Russia is in active warfare with the West, and he sees Africa and says, well, you know what? If I can go to Africa and get some of these African nations to circumvent the deals that they have with France, well, then that would make France extremely weak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, allegedly, and I'm going to undermine France's attempts to control these African nations, not because I think that these African nations are being done wrong and they need to be done right, but because I know that this action will weaken France, which weakens the West, which strengthens me. Now, at the end of the day, though, an enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right.
And the friend of my enemy is now my enemy. Now, I said allegedly, but the Ukrainian government has been reported as accusing Russia of directly sponsoring the coup in Niger Republic. But, you have to look at it with a grain of salt because they are currently at war. So we don't know if this is just a war of propaganda spilling over or if this is an actual true statement, but it's telling in either event. Now, Russia isn't directly in Africa. Now, there's the group called the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group is a Russian paramilitary organization, and it's been involved in a lot of counter-military operations in Africa. So the group isn't technically part of the Russian government on paper, but it essentially carries out a lot of the will of the Russian elite, if you will, but they are technically a separate entity of mercenaries of Russian descent. Now, according to Russia, these are the resources that Russia is actually interested in. Now, you see, it's oil, gas, diamonds, uranium, copper, manganese, iron ore, and gold. Now, of these resources, these are the resources Russia actually has access to. Right? They have energy deals in place in nations like Nigeria, Egypt, South Sudan, Gabon, and Congo, Angola as well. Now, some of these places, they're looking to build power plants to help these nations industrialize. Now, industrialization does two things. Now, a lot of African nations aren't fully industrialized, which means that what they do is they sell natural resources at a cheap price to European nations who then turn around and refine and resell those products at market rate. So Africa is basically the plug, and a very good plug, and the resale value is almost 10 times. However, when a nation industrializes, instead of selling you uranium, they might just sell you generated power, which means that they have a whole full power sector. Not only are they powering their nation, but they have so much power that they have enough to sell to you. And with that power, they're building factories in their land, and they're processing more and more things and selling more finished goods, which means they no longer need your finished goods. And in fact, they're going to start selling you finished goods and finished products, which means they're a developed nation. So Russia allegedly is trying to come in and further help with electricity generation in certain nations that are looking in that direction. Now, here are nations that Rosatom is like the Con Edison, if you will. It's the power generation company of Russia. Now, they've signed some interesting deals. They've signed some interesting agreements to construct nuclear power plants in places like Nigeria, in places like Egypt, and they also have cooperation agreements in places like Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, Zambia, South Africa, Ghana, and the like. Now, it'll be interesting to see if they actually fulfill these promises or these agreements and truly build these nuclear power plants in Africa as their agreements to construct such state. Also, too, Russia is actually fighting a media war. They're using propaganda. Now, of course, you have to remember that mind control is important because what you watch, you believe. So there's a lot of hidden messages in things like movies and TV shows that paint a certain narrative of how the people who are painting that narrative and allowing that narrative want society to be structured. So you might watch something and you might say, man, there's so much propaganda in this movie that I can't enjoy it. Now, Russia also has their media, quote unquote, influence, where they want to spread pro-Russian propaganda and make the West be the enemy in their version of events. And of course, in the version of events, like in the late 80s, early 90s, whenever you'd watch an action movie in America, the villain always had a Russian accent. And then sometime in the late 90s, early 2000s, the villain would have an Arabic accent. You know, all those things are subtle propaganda to let you know who your perceived enemy is supposed to be. So now this is the total activity of Russia. You can see things span from military cooperation, nuclear cooperation agreements, media cooperation, mineral operations, agricultural ties. So Russia is really trying to move into the African market. Now here comes West Africa. Now this is the theater if there was to be any type of instance. Now we've noticed that there've already been a demarcation. There's been a demarcation and there have been clear sides. So for example, at the recent ECOWAS meeting of heads of state, there were certain nations that were clearly missing. Mali, Niger, Guinea-Bissau, Burkina Faso, and Guinea were absent from the ECOWAS meeting in Abuja. They essentially boycotted it. And the ECOWAS meeting was essentially to see, okay, if we have to invade, who's willing to put down resources? The fact that these nations clearly weren't there shows that they're counter to it at best or ready to fight the other nations within ECOWAS if there is indeed an invasion. There's also footage of the military heads of states of Mali and Niger and some of these other nations actually meeting together. So there's intelligence showing that rather than going to the ECOWAS meeting, they had their own meeting. So the sides are already starting to become split. Now, the president of Nigeria, Asiwaju Ahmed Tinubu, has come out to strongly state that we don't want any more coups in West Africa. So Nigeria has taken a hardline position as the nation to essentially say, yes, no coups. And the other nations have essentially taken the position to say, we're not worried about that. We're worried about these business agreements with France that are, in their words, crippling their nations. Another interesting thing is that Nigeria preliminarily is expected to lead the charge in any military invasion when it comes to ECOWAS. However, the problem is this: you have to understand ethnicity as well in Africa. Now, if you look at the people of Niger, they're Hausa people, the vast majority. And in the northern Nigeria, the vast majority are Hausa people. Some literally, the only thing separating Niger and Nigeria is a road in many cases, meaning that your neighbor behind you in a small town might be in Niger Republic. You'll be Nigerian, but both of you speak Hausa. You're both Hausa people, and you're the same people, and you've been the same people for 1,000 years. However, the British decided to haphazardly draw a line and say that part is a French territory, this part's an English territory, and they literally would draw a line through a town or a community or a city. And mind you that these people are of the same ethnic stock. So now, a large majority of Nigerian armed forces are Northerners, Hausa people and Hausa-speaking people. And it's interesting to note Hausa-speaking people, because Hausa-speaking people share a natural affinity greater than the actual ethnic group of Hausa people. So the language of Hausa people unites them, similar to something like Swahili, where a language will unite the people and there's an affinity. So now you have, in the event that Nigeria would be fighting Niger, you would essentially be having a southern president ordering northern troops of Hausa extraction and northern extraction, Hausa-speaking people, to go and fight their neighbors who are also Hausa-speaking people and Hausa ethnic people. And the reasoning wouldn't quite be clear. That's another problem that we run into if we actually take a micro look at it, in essentially telling someone from another ethnic group telling Hausa people they need to fight each other. That is another layer of difficulty that is going to be present. Now, another layer of difficulty, if Nigeria were to actually fight Niger, is that Niger is more in the desert than any other part of Nigeria, which means that you have people that grew up in the desert. They know how to survive in the desert. They live in the desert. The desert is inhospitable. They go into the desert, then launch attacks on you, and then go back into the desert. Worst comes to worst, if you push them that far out, they will stay there. And moreover, there's no border between Niger and Nigeria. There's no official border. There are people that cross the border maybe 10 times a day just selling cola nuts, right? Because if you walk on this side of the street, you're in Nigeria. That side of the street, you're in Niger Republic. Now, if you create problems and there's a war with a porous border, you'll have insurgents simply cross in, go to a place, create a problem, and then leave when they're done and cross the line again. And that will be asymmetrical warfare. And the only way to stop asymmetrical warfare is through intelligence. And the Nigerian army intelligence gathering isn't as strong as it could be. And then not only is it a desert terrain, but you have factions forming, which means it won't be just one nation. It will be many nations, internally and externally, if these nations actually do engage in war. Now, the issue is that, as some foreign media have noted, the coup in Niger leaves France and the US exposed in West Africa. Now, that's a big statement. It's stating that there's a weakness for them there. Now, you have to remember that when many of the French forces were kicked out of Mali and Guinea and some of the other places, they relocated to Niger. And Niger basically said, okay, we'll be the new base for Western power. So now that there's a coup in Niger, which was supposed to be the base of Western power, now Western power is really baseless. Now they have Cote d'Ivoire, but in the Sahel, they want to be able to maintain their grip on the uranium and the gold and many of the other natural resources that they have historically gotten at extremely low prices. Now, back to Nigeria. When we look at Nigeria, we have to ask, is Nigeria in a condition to actually wage a war? Nigeria is facing its own list of issues currently. Now, Nigeria is another rich nation. However, lack of political will and lack of leadership, lack of people who get there who actually want to build the nation and not merely pilfer the nation. We have more of the latter than the former. So if we look at the year 2002, that was one of the best years ever recorded in Nigerian history for annual GDP growth. It was at 15%, one of the highest in the world. Now, if you remember, anywhere from 2002 till about 2012, 13, Nigeria was an amazing place to be. Those are years that I was living there, and even when I left living there, I was going back every year if I could. Nigeria was growing. You had hope and optimism. Unfortunately, with the emergence of the last administration under the APC government of Muhammadu Buhari, we saw negative growth rates for the first time since a long time. In many people's lives, they've never seen it this bad. And if you just look at it by the numbers, it really was that bad. So many are wondering, with the country in the condition that it was left in after Muhammadu Buhari's administration, is Nigeria really in a position to fight a war where there's not much to really gain? It's not as if Niger Republic invaded and took 6 states out of Nigeria. So now you have to go fight and take those states back, and that's what you're gaining. You have to ask yourself, what's the upside for Nigeria? Now, with all that being said, one of the highlights is that the president, this wasn't a bloody coup. We've had plenty of those in Nigeria. This was a coup where they merely put him under house arrest. They, not many lives were lost, but of course lives were lost. But they handled it in such a manner where their problem was with the French and not necessarily with their own people
who were taking orders allegedly from the French. So that's an interesting dynamic, an interesting level that we've come to.
Perfect. Hey, listen, we'll take one caller. Well, we'll take two callers because I have to hard stop like around 9:15, 9:20. So I'll put the link in the chat room if you want to call in and add to the conversation. We'll take two callers and have your question ready. You can ask two questions. Two questions for two callers. There we go. So links in the chat room. If you want to call in and add to the conversation, you're more than welcome to call in and add to the conversation. That was thorough, Ebube.
Appreciate it. You wanna, because for some reason in the media, and in the mainstream media, when they cover it, they just say Niger is very poor, and it's like, aren't you going to talk about how this rich nation has all these poor people in it, or are you just going to gloss over that?
Yeah. African Wahala, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ebube, for that great presentation. Man, you did justice. I just wanted to contribute. The coup is unfortunate, but for me personally, I am in support of the coup because number one, the Western influence has to go. It absolutely has to go. Secondly, you can't have a situation where most of the people in a country are ruled by someone that doesn't have their interest, someone that has decided to be a puppet for those taking away all their resources. It's just not going to work. So Nigeria playing big brother role, it also needs to be realistic and realize that, and I'm not talking about Nigerians, I'm talking about the government. It needs to realize that it's just wasting its time. I understand there is a lot of legitimacy issues with the current president, and he's looking for a way to appease France and the United States so they can support him. But if he's going to play games with millions of lives in the West African region for his own selfish interest, I mean, that's just ridiculous. But I just thought I came in and thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Dynast Amir.
Hey, I'll be back. I'll be back home Monday. I'll be 10 toes down at Murtala Muhammad Airport.
Yes, sir. Be safe out there, man.
I will. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Miss Mile, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry, it's not Miss. It's Mr. It's just.
Okay, you got a woman as your profile pic. No worries.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah. So what I was trying to ask you is, what do you think? Do you think it is good for West African countries to continue doing coup d'etats without, putting measures to stop it from spreading to other Sahelian countries and West African countries as well? My take in this is that we have seen these coups happening in the 90s and the 80s, and military governments didn't bring any form of changes to the continent. Okay, so now in order for them to stop this type of things going on, I think it is a good move that Tinubu did, that the ECOWAS should show their strength to stop this type of coups from widespreading across the entire West Africa. Because by doing this, they will help secure Nigeria from attacks from Boko Haram, because most of them come from Niger. So by intervening in Niger, they will bring lasting peace in Nigeria as well. It's geopolitics. And at the same time,
I have a question. And the thing is, for time, if you could just get to the question. We're running short on time. So if you could just get to your question, and we'll go from there. So what exactly is your question, brother?
That is my question. Like, for geopolitical reasons, I think it is a very good idea for right now Nigeria to intervene in Chad to stop the occurrence of coups across the Sahel and West Africa. So, what do you think? Do you think it where the West African bloc should just allow the coups to continue because they have agreement with other coup leaders like
All right, well, so you asked the
Mali?
question. Wait. You know what?
Yeah. So,
You
thank
asked the
you.
question. I get it. For time's sake,
Yeah.
we gotta just kind of keep this very short. If you could ask questions, just very short to the question. I mean, you don't need to preface it just to the question because you take time away from other potential people if you elongate the question. So the question is it a good thing? Well, to answer that question, I don't know. It could be good or it could be bad, right? It could be a situation where these generals come together and say, you know what, these agreements aren't good. We need to renegotiate them. And they renegotiate them and they can do more things for their people. Sure, that's always good. However, there's a lot of variables in between that point and this point. There's a lot of hurdles that will happen before they get there. Now, will they get there? Who knows? We've had dozens of African leaders wanting to renegotiate the economic terms of their independence, and we all saw how that ended. And so if you ask me, is it good? Well, you look at somewhere like Libya. Is Libya better with the intervention or is it worse? At the end of the day, who knows? Who knows how these things will end? I personally will not pretend as if I have a crystal ball and I can tell you, oh, yes, this is good because in 20 years, this or that. All I can say is that these are the factors on ground and this is how this may play out. It may be a good thing. It may be a bad thing. But I do want to thank you for your question. We have Tunaija. If you could briefly just give us your question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, greetings. Thank you for having me. This in Diners. Greetings, Ebube, and I thank you for the presentation. I think you are getting better at it, and clearly, it looks your looks don't show that you are working hard. Thank you. Regarding this coup, what would you say would be the best? Or let's put it this way: something that Tinubu can request from the West, because now they are in a bind here. There's a potential that the French could be kicked out and the American military base could be kicked out. My own argument is that as a democracy, we are not seeing any dividends of democracy, and Niger was one. What do you think Tinubu could ask from the West now that they have the opportunity, because now they have leverage, in order to benefit Nigeria and Niger at the same time?
Well, that's the thing. It has to be something that can be granted by the West, and it has to be something that won't just benefit a small clique of people. Because most times, a lot of the politicians, unfortunately, especially the politicians that we have in Africa, Nigeria in particular, they're not looking at things to benefit the masses. They're not there for that. They're there to enrich themselves and their small group of circle of friends and within their network. So unfortunately, most times when these situations present themselves where African nations may have leverage, sometimes rather than selecting or saying, well, we need this thing for the people, or saying that this needs to be done for the people, or that saying that we need, honestly, the best thing, if it depends on what Nigeria's objective is. The Nigeria's objective is for West Africa generally, that's one thing. If the Nigerian government's for Nigeria as a nation, that's another thing. If the Nigerian government is for a small group of people, that's another thing. So now if the government is just out for a small group of people, they may ask for something that just merely benefits them and their clique, period.
Well, what would
let me just finish.
What would you advise?
If they're out for Nigeria, now there's a motley of things that Nigeria could use, could need, things that could actually benefit the nation. They need to review one of those and select, and one of them, any one of them, or all of them. Now, if they were looking out for West Africa as a whole, they might just say, you know what? The cause of a lot of these coups is that these people, their governments really can't do a whole lot for them because their governments don't have economic independence. Denying these places their economic independence puts pressure on the region because we're going to be continually subjected to coups. So what we need to do is, after we restore order in Niger or participate in that, we would like to see a lot of these contracts renegotiated across West Africa. So it all depends on what the Nigerian elites' aims are. And going by the past track record, it seems that many of the elites are in it for fellow elites and themselves.
All right, thank you. Just as a side note from your presentation, it was showing that Nigeria's economy was growing the fastest in 2002. And coincidentally, that is the same year Boko Haram started. and Nigeria never achieved that growth rate anymore. That is quite odd. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for
Definitely, brother.
joining.
You take care.
Ebube, close us out, brother.
All right. So if you haven't paid your price of admission, go ahead and hit the like button. Go ahead and share this as well. You know, independent media deserves to be shared. Also, too, if you haven't subscribed to Up Close and Center, make sure you subscribe. New content will be coming. Quality content as usual. And I have no more. Go ahead and once again hit that like button, and thank you for your time and your commitment to the continent.
Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Like, share, subscribe. Make sure you go subscribe to Brother Ebube's page, Up Close and Center. That is Mere Search for Huru. I'll be in Nigeria next week. Looking forward to it. Footage will be uploaded during our adventure there. Until next time, family, that is Mere Search for Huru. Peace.
Take care.